Good evening. We're happy to have Dr. Wayne House with us again this evening. We've enjoyed his lecture so far, and so he is going to be speaking one more time during this trip for Dr. Dean. And so we look forward to your message tonight.
Well, it's good to be here again, and we've been dealing with archaeology regarding areas of the Bible like the Old Testament. We dealt some with the Gospels, and Jesus talked about the early church. There are just so many of these things that can be talked about. We could actually, I was looking at really, as I was working on this series, I've been creating new series, like there's 4 in the Old Testament, and doing all this stuff. But we're going to cover the 7 churches of the Revelation tonight. Now, it's hard to do archaeology on things that haven't happened yet, like the future in the book of Revelation. I was trying to figure out, how do I do this outside the 7 churches and cover the rest of the book? And I thought, I don't know if I can do that, because I think you have to have it there already to go back and dig it up. So I'm going to skip that portion. I did, however, when I was working on this, develop a whole series on the book of Revelation in case I ever come back on how to approach the book and understand what's going on in the book. That might be fun. But nonetheless, I do think I'm coming back March the 24th, if I remember correctly what I saw from Pastor Dean. I understand he's coming back this weekend. So I think, Hopefully he'll be back this weekend. If not, who knows who'll be here. All right. This has been a really great time to be with you. Tonight I'll not keep you quite as long. I think I can cut this down to an hour and a half. And I'm joking. I'll probably be less than that. Because I'm just covering the 7 churches, and you'll find out that in dealing with the 7 churches, you're only dealing with a few, churches. I mean, Christianity spread in the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century in Asia Minor, amazingly. And even in as early as, I think it's about 117 AD, when Pliny the Younger was writing The Emperor, he said that the temples were being forsaken because of this new superstition. And so they were already having trouble at that stage. What are we going to do? We're losing all of our people. So there are probably 100 different sites that we could talk about now that are being excavated or investigated in the country of Turkey. Fortunately, even though it's Islamic, it's still largely secular. That happened by Ataturk after World War II. He made it a secular country. The new prime minister or president, which one of you, I can't remember what his title is right now. He's begun to sort of move it back the other way, but largely it's still that kind of country. So they are interested in history and even Christian thought in regards to Turkey, because that was the major movement in the country until the time of the coming of the Turks. So we're going to cover a few things, not as much as I would like to cover, because certain areas have not been investigated very much at all. And we'll talk more about that. A new thing just came out. I read it last week that now plans have been made to start excavating Colossae, which is close to Laodicea, in the Lycus Valley, close to Hieropolis, modern-day Pamukkale. And Colossae is a great place to work on. I've climbed on the top of it and walked around it and looked and wished that something would be done here, but finally I got news that it's happening, and not because of me, but nonetheless I'm glad that it is. So we're going to just talk about the 7 churches, okay? And I'm right now standing underneath, and I'll show this site to you. This is one of my favorite sites, or one of my favorite pictures, because it looks like I know what I'm doing. And so I'm in this archaeological site underneath the city of Smyrna. And don't I look like an archaeologist? Maybe Indiana Jones or something. All I need is a bullwhip or something. Anyway, that's underneath the city there at Smyrna, or what is called modern Izmir. So I'm not going to read all of these biblical passages to you. You can follow along if you want. So portions of it, you can look at your Bible. But the text of the Revelation, chapter 1, verse 1 through 322 introduces the book of Revelation. Now, the book is called Revelation, which is the Greek word apocalypsis, which means disclosure, unveiling, or revelation. But there was a kind of literature that was being developed quite a bit in the early 2nd century among Christians. It had started earlier. Daniel was sort of viewed as maybe one of the first books similar to this. During the intertestamental period, you have some of that before the time of the New Testament. And then after the New Testament, you have several different works written by Christians, some heretical Christians. You wouldn't want to go to church with them. But nonetheless, they had apocalypses. Now, the thing is, the book of Revelation is a little different, because if you notice that verse 1 says, the apocalypsis, the unveiling or disclosure of Jesus, the Messiah, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place. I'm going to talk about the idea of soon in just a moment. And he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John. So this is an indirect work, right? You've got Jesus speaking through an angel, not directly at this point, who testified to the word of God and in the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy. Now notice we have two different ideas then. It's not strictly an apocalyptic work. It's also viewed as a prophetic work. And what becomes so obvious about that, and I know I'm not moving into archaeology right now, but what's so important about that is that the book of Revelation quotes the Old Testament more than any other book in the entire New Testament. It is just packed full, chapter by chapter, with statements and allusions from the Old Testament. So when it says it's prophetic, it truly is highly reliant upon the Old Testament text. That's important for us to understand, which is more so than a standard apocalyptic. So he says the time is near. Now, all of us looking at this 2,000 years later wonder what it means by the time is near. It doesn't seem that it happened very quickly. I mean, it hasn't happened yet. Now, there are people who believe the book of Revelation was written before AD 70 and that it relates to the coming destruction of the city of Jerusalem. And so they're able to get out of that. If you have John writing in the 60s, like 65, and the destruction of Jerusalem happens 5 years later, then that works out pretty well for them. But the fact is, you don't find church fathers anywhere, and these people live very close to the time, of the first century. You don't find any of them saying the work of the Revelation was written prior to AD 70. It's just not written that way. Matter of fact, several of them indicate it happened at the time of Domitian, which is in the 90s, which is what we think, about 95. Not 30 years earlier, but 95. That's important. And so this is the idea of the Revelation. And we have some great, great places in here that if we had another situation and more time, I would want to go into develop some of the ideas that have been developed in the book. But I'm still going to just talk about a couple. One is the statement, behold, he is coming with the clouds, see, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And we're told several times that it's soon. But I've taken some time to look at things that are happening soon in other books of the Old Testament and New Testament. And soon doesn't mean going to happen real soon. Soon sometimes would take eons of time to happen, and they don't happen that soon. So this word soon is more speaking not to the period of time, the lapse of time that would go on, but more relating to the means, or that's not even the word I'm trying to find. It's looking at the way in which it happens, not how soon it happens in our way of thinking. Time period. It's more when it happens rapidly. When it starts taking place, it's going to move fast. And that's more the idea than the idea that it needed to take place in 5 years or something like that. Okay? So that gets you an introduction to a few things here. So we're going to move on through this, and notice that John is on an island. Now, anybody been to Patmos? One person in the building. This person keeps following me around. Patmos, okay? I got to tell you, if I had the money, I would take and buy a vacation place there about 3 months a year and just get over there and get away. That is such a wonderful little island. And by the way, things are opening up. I understand that in March, Israel's actually going to get rid of all their policies on that thing that didn't work anyway and let people in. And I think Greece is doing the same. Patmos is owned by Greece. Matter of fact, all those thousands of islands in the Aegean Sea don't belong to Turkey, even though they're a lot bigger. They are owned by Greece, and Patmos is one. It's a great little island. I've spent time there several days sometimes in the past and enjoy walking around and doing around it, going places. It's a very calm situation in the middle of the sea there. Well, John was there not on vacation. He had been exiled by the emperor. Now, the way it used to happen is this, and this doesn't work exactly the same way in our system. There's some similarity, but when an emperor didn't like something, he made a law. And when the law was enacted, people had to follow it. When the emperor got assassinated or some other thing took place, he died. Very few of them just left office, so to speak, on their own. Most of these people want to stay in that position forever, you know. When they are gone, the law that they created goes with them. In other words, they don't stay on the books. The exiles and all these things that the emperors did only lasted as long as they lasted. After that, people erased it and you went on to another situation. What's the next emperor going to say? This happened with Aquila and Priscilla, who in the time of Claudius exiled all the Jews. I mean, just one day he got up and said, I don't like Jews. And he makes a law, everybody has to leave. And you did, or you'd be in trouble. And so they left. And Aquila and Priscilla go to Corinth, and of course that's where they meet Paul, and they work together. It's amazing how God superintends. And I'm sure when they left Rome, they thought, what are we going to do? Oh, they hadn't thought, we're going to run in and become friends of the Apostle Paul. See, we don't know what God has planned when he moves us around sometimes. I really hadn't planned on living in Navasota, Texas right now. We had talked about moving to someplace, but Arena came down there with a friend and found Navasota in the south. I thought we'd be back in Dallas where I used to teach, at Dallas Seminary. So here we are. You never know what God has planned. I wouldn't be able to do as much of this running back and forth here if I were up in Dallas. So it's really been great. And that's what I'm saying to you. Sometimes we don't know what's going on. But the exiles take place, and when the emperor went out, John was released. He could go back home, so to speak. And so he was on Patmos, and that's where he had the revelation, also the prophetic thing that he had and wrote. So that gets us going on that. Let's take just a moment and look. I'll see if I can show people here. Can you see that little thing? This is Asia Minor, part of it there. And that was a very important area of the ancient world. You notice that it was called Anatolia at one time during the time of the Hittites and afterwards. This is a place that was conquered by more than one group of people. But when the Persians finally came, they began coming across this. It became a major center, Asia Minor. And it became the most significant place in the world by the 2nd century for the growth of Christianity, as I somewhat mentioned before. A lot of people turned from the gods to God in this period of time. And Paul has some interesting experiences there. Remember the one person he cast out the demon after, even though she was running around and said, Paul's a great guy. He said, we don't need your testimony. She was following, actually, if you look and see what religion she was involved in, she was involved in the religion of the oracle at Delphi, in Delphi, Greece, was where the major center, but she was a devotee of that, the Python religion, they called it. And so Asia Minor just was a place for great growth, and obviously it was a Roman occupied area also. I said there was a number of places, but you're going to notice that especially in this area here, we're talking about the southwestern portion, right? See that little line? The southwestern portion of this place is the most important. Near the coast. Izmir is right about here somewhere. I'd have to look exactly. Can't hardly, the map is too small, but somewhere right about here, there's Izmir. And that's ancient Smyrna. Smyrna is where Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Anybody ever had to read that in school? I did. But anyway, the Iliad and the Odyssey, probably the most important ancient works that were ever written from the classical period. Around 800 years before Christ. If you look at the manuscripts that were produced of ancient books like Plato's works, Sophocles, Aristophanes, and even Latin, Pliny and Ovid and so forth. If you look at the ancient books, the one that has the most number that survive, and by that I mean sometimes 50 or 60 times a number, would be Homer's works. There's something like 800 extant, that means they still are in existence, about 800 copies of Homer's work. I think there's only about 2 or 3 copies extant of Plato's. And Plato was a big name, but people read Homer. It was a great piece of work. See, so that occurred at Smyrna. It also became a very important place for Christianity, and that's where Polycarp was burned by the pagans at Smyrna because of his faith. If you read the book on Fox's Book of Martyrs, anybody ever read that? I read that in high school. It talks about all the way through history and how Christians were suffered for their faith.
He didn't burn; they had to stab him.
Well, okay, I got past Nike last week to Tukes. And by the way, I did find an example of Tukes at Ephesus, and it's at the it's at the Temple of Hadrian. So anyway, that's fine. But she got me on that last week. It actually Nike is the god of running and so forth and speed and so forth. Tukes is a god of luck. Okay, so we got that straight. Polycarp was not officially burned up because they tried to burn him, but it wasn't very successful, so they stabbed him. But nonetheless, you're correct on that. Appreciate your feedback. Let's keep moving while I'm doing better. Okay, now, isn't this a beautiful sea? You're talking about blue sea. Remember the statement of the Aeneid? Anybody have to read the Aeneid, the Roman, Latin Aeneid? It's a poem. And I went through the whole thing. It talks about a statement. Several statements in ancient literature are ones that we picked up in our language. You ever heard between the devil and the deep blue sea? You ever heard that? Anybody raise your hand? Isn't that came out of the Aeneid. That's where you found it. And somebody read it and passed it along, and it came into our usage. Now, when you look at this, the people who wrote the Aeneid, the guy who wrote the Aeneid, had experience of this kind of water. When you go to the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean, it is so blue and beautiful. And this is an example, but this one is in the area of Patmos, which is right off the coast of modern-day Kusadasi or Izmir, ancient Ephesus, which is Kusadasi today, and Smyrna, which is called Izmir now. Now, you have some beautiful islands all the way through. There are 10,000 Greek islands in the Aegean Sea. People don't live on every one of them, and some are small, some are big, but they are all wonderful when you go there. So I do lead, finally, with COVID breaking up and people getting back to get their sanity back. we'll be doing some tours to Turkey. I love going to Turkey. I have actually been talking about doing one in June. But it's a great country, beautiful, so diverse that you'll see. They have underground cities that Christians hid in you can go into. They have places that have known buildings for hundreds of miles that people used to have churches in and live houses in. They're made by lava. They just came down and people gutted them out. It's really a phenomenal place. But this is the sea on the way to Patmos. You can see the movement of the boat here. So I took a picture a little bit bigger there. This here is in the area of Patmos. Now, Patmos is not one specific island, but it's a combination. It's got a large portion with some little portions around it, which is not uncommon in islands. You go down to Tonga, which had the recent earthquake, place I've been at probably 15, 16 times, Arena 3, I think. A volcano erupted and it's caused a lot of problems. But they had a 3-island group, Ha'apai, Vavahu, and Tongatapu, down there right close to New Zealand. It's right on the international date line. When the year 2000 passed, Tonga was the first one on the news, first one on the television. They were singing hymns the day of U2000. That was great to watch. And a lot of these people I've known for so many years. But a lot of islands have little islands around them too, just like here. But it's a beautiful area. Here's the city of Patmos. Now, what you see there is largely Patmos. Most of the population live right there. They maybe have some outlanders here somewhere around, but generally speaking, this is in fact the structure of where it is. This is where, again, John wrote the Revelation. Another look at it from a little farther away, give you a perspective of the area around. There's that person keeps following me around. But we're right there. She says, quit saying that. But that's the boat we came in on. And there I am standing. That's 50 years ago probably. Anyway, standing in front of the same area. Now, there are a lot of hills around. Matter of fact, I did a video up in the highest area of Patmos once, sitting at a place right by the church of the prophet Elijah, as it's called. And that's where I sort of did a video for the study Bible that some of you use. If you go to the study Bible in Revelation, the first chapter, I have a whole fairly done on all the 7 church issues. But that's up there. This right here is looking at the Church of St. John. You wouldn't guess that the monastery and church that was established there by the Greek Orthodox would name it St. John. Sort of a natural, isn't it? So I got to be good friends with some of the priests up there. I really like them. I was doing a series, again for the study Bible, at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And the Greeks, or I should make it broader, the Eastern Orthodox over against the Roman Catholic, call the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the Roman Catholic designation. The Eastern Church calls it the Church of the Resurrection. They focus more on the resurrection than they do the death. So if you put them together, you got your theology straight, death and resurrection. But they have a lot of interesting art. You'll see this art all the way through Turkey as well as Greece. This beautiful frescoes on the walls and inside little buildings sometimes. But this is the Church of St. John, and I was talking to a priest and I asked him if I could do some video there and take pictures in the museum, and he said, no, you'd have to talk to somebody else about that. And I said, well, who? And he said, well, he's gone. He won't be back for a couple of weeks. And I said, I can't really stay around. I said, wouldn't you do it? He said, no, I don't think you probably should. I said, listen, I got permission at the Church of the Resurrection. I know you got to know your terminology. I got permission at the Church of the Resurrection to video and take pictures inside there. And he said, this is not Jerusalem. I said, yeah, but aren't you guys friends? And he started laughing and laughing, and he looked at me and he said, do whatever you want. You got to learn how to talk to people. And he enjoyed that, and ever since then we've had a little relationship. So anyway, these things are throughout. It's really wonderful to see it. This right here, believe it or not, is the entrance to what is viewed as the Cave of St. John. Now you may ask me, is this the real place that John was sitting and wrote the Revelation and had the visions? And they would say yes. They've got a building there. It's all fixed up inside. But you know what? It might be. It was probably in that kind of area. There's no sign up. You know, John writes, I was here. That's true about a lot of archaeology, but on the other hand, some can be more easily understood and verified. Some things like this are difficult to do so. But what I tell people sometimes when I lead tours, I say, okay, ready? What the Bible's talking about happened somewhere around here. It's hard to go to a place and say, here, step on it. It's just hard to do that. We're in the area that it happened. So it happened somewhere here, close by. If it's not here, it's here. You understand what I'm doing? And the historical understanding is more important than you are able to stand on the exact place. I used to tell people when I walk through Jerusalem, and I have a crowd of 20 or 30 with me, we're walking through Jerusalem, and I said, I want you to know that you are walking where Jesus walked, 30 feet above. Yeah, because the first century's road is down 30 feet. That's why when you go to the southwestern wall of the Temple Mount where they have the excavations going on, that street is actually first century. If you'll look at the rest of it, it's real high. You'll have to look and see where what they sometimes call the Welling Wall, they don't really call it that anymore. It's a western wall. If you'll see where they are, they're up high. That's 2,000 years later. We're on the very first century. Jesus actually did, his steps were here. So that's about what you're working with. Okay, does that all make sense? So here it says, the cave of the Apocalypse was on the island of Patmos. Well, see, you know, that's a pretty good way to deal with it. They didn't say it actually necessarily was inside this little cave, but maybe it's a good cave. He had to be somewhere. And by the way, he was there not as we think like he wasn't like in a prison. He was simply exiled, not allowed to be where he was. Why did they do that? Well, John was pretty aged at that point. He was certainly very popular. He lived in Ephesus. He had actually brought Mary from the crucifixion. You know the story. Jesus put under John, who was a young teenager in those days. You realize that? John was probably a teenager. That's why in some of the paintings they paint him much fairer, because he was a young guy. I mean, Peter was probably in his 40s at least, and John's probably 15 or 16, whatever it is. And so he lived a long time, and he took Mary, who also was a young woman. If you know the age issues in those days, younger women and older men, that's pretty standard. And so Mary was taken by John under his keeping. And where did he go? He ended up in Asia Minor in a place called Ephesus. See, we know that from a lot of information. And John was teaching individuals in Asia Minor who were young men before he died. Again, he was, by that time, you got to figure the years. You got 60 or 70 years later. He's teaching Papias, who's at Hieropolis, that we're going to see pictures of tonight. And he was also teaching another man by the name of Polycarp, who was a bishop at Smyrna, Izmir, which is where he was put to death. So you have all this stuff going on here, and we have good records of some of these things in the Fathers. So, you know, it did happen on this island for sure, so we can be confident of that. This right here stands underneath the door, which identifies, they call him, and you don't have to read the Greek there. And by the way, they did some abbreviations. Even if you do have some Greek, you have to understand the abbreviations. In some of the manuscripts, instead of saying God like we would write it in Greek, which is theos, theta, epsilon, omicron, sigma, theos, they just put theta and sigma, and that's it. They abbreviated and put a line across the top. With Jesus, which is Iesus, iota, eta, sigma, omicron, upsilon, sigma, Iesus, where we get in forms like Spanish and so forth. Even Jesus looks pretty close in English. Iesus. They would just simply put an iota and a sigma. So it's not uncommon to abbreviate ancient Greek in certain contexts, particularly when you're writing inscriptions. Like on some of these monuments you see, they're not all written out. Some things are abbreviated. So you're getting information right now. You didn't even know you were being taught archaeology, but this is actually what you do. You've got to learn how people did things if you're going to understand them. But this right here says, the Holy John, St. John on the left, and it calls him the Theologos. Theologos is a word which means a theologian. Theos is God. Logos is one who studies God, a theologian. That's how we get to it. So St. John, the theologian, that's what they call him in Eastern Orthodoxy. And when you read Gospel of John and when you read the epistles of John and the Revelation, you really come to appreciate that John, even though he had been a young man and probably wasn't well educated as we think, he was really quite smart and an extremely good theologian. His gospel is a theological work that is far, far more significant in that aspect than are the Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In other words, he's the one that really developed very heavy theology. Okay? And he doesn't so much cover the historical materials and some of the events. He gets right into the theology from verse 1. Don't you like it, the fact the Bible starts out with Moses when he writes, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." That's sort of a theological statement. Starts right off with it, doesn't it? Well, John starts off his gospel the same way. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was facing, that the Greek word means that. The Word was facing God, and the Word was God. All things were created by Him. Without Him, not anything was created that was created. I mean, that's good theology, and he starts it right off. St. John, the theologian, that's why you have that way. That all makes sense to you? Any corrections? All right, now, this is the this is the entrance into the cave. It doesn't look as much like a cave as it used to, but when you get inside, it is. What is problematic is they don't want you to take pictures or anything inside here. I could have tried to sneak it in and maybe done it, but I didn't. But it's inside the cave. Now, I could probably get permission if I go find my priest friend, but I didn't have him handy. Okay? Now, how do you view the Revelation? Again, I'm not going to get into all the teachings of the Revelation tonight. As I said to you, we're going to focus on some archaeological stuff. But it's important to have this historical language background because really, when you do archaeology, you must know something about the history and the language and all those things, even the theology that people were arguing and thinking about and so forth. You've got to have some of this knowledge to understand what they did and what they said. So there are people, when you deal with the fact of John's statement here, if I get back to it here, where is it? Is it that far back? I guess it's ahead. I think I put it ahead, and I just decided not to repeat it twice. That's what I did, just not to be redundant. Some people reading about the 7 churches believe that the 7 churches refer to 7 time periods. And so when you read about the church at Ephesus and Smyrna and Pergamum and Thyatira and Sardis and Philadelphia and Laodicea, all those are not really so much talking about these local churches, these groups of Christians in these various cities. And by the way, you realize they didn't, in the 90s and early hundreds of that period, they did not have church buildings. You know that, right? You met in localized places, sometimes in catacombs, sometimes and by the ocean, sometimes, you met in the forest, wherever you were. You didn't have our normal structure even like this. So it's important to understand that. But there were communities of Christians, and so calling them churches or assemblies or Christian communities would be very accurate, okay, rather than the building that we've attached to the word. Now, some people, though, believe then that you have 7 time periods of church history defined by the 7 churches to whom John wrote. That all sounds interesting, but I don't see anything, and I don't know what some people teach around here, and if I've somehow stepped on anybody's toes, I'm correct. Now, I try to keep you guys awake, So, anyway, the fact is, I don't see anything in the text whatsoever that would lend to the idea that these are time periods. He's writing to local communities of Christians who lived in the 90s, who were going through certain issues and how to deal with certain problems. Now, if you want to say that, some of the problems you see in the church of Thyatira or Sardis or whatever occur in churches of the 21st. Are we in the 21st now? I'm losing track of time. The 21st century, I'd say you're right. There are probably similar kinds of issues and problems in churches throughout every decade of the last 2,000 years. Don't talk about time periods like, the church of Laodicea is this time period of history and the church of Ephesus is this time period of history. I'd say everything going in every church probably is applicable to some place, somewhere, sometime in the last 2,000 years. Is that right? Sure, churches have issues. They're common to all men and women. So that's not what is being argued here. What is being argued here, these are time periods that are emphasized historically, and I see no basis of it. I see the basis of all the churches being emphasized every single decade of every single year. I guarantee you. Now, so I want to move from that as a hermeneutic. That is an interpretive flaw in my perspective. And I know people want to use typology or some way to get to it. Hey, I'm dispensational myself. I have no problem with that. I believe that there are some typological aspects if we have to be very careful, not get carried away, but I do think there are some. On the other hand, I think something else is going on in the passage. Now, so we get to this question here where we have, my little thing up here. When I saw him, that is this angel, remember Jesus spoke through the angel, not Jesus directly. Does that make sense? Okay. I fell at his feet like a dead man, and he placed his right hand on me and says, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last." Well, how can the angel say that if Jesus is, that's a little problematic. That sounds like Jesus himself, and I wouldn't fault anybody if they thought that. But the fact is, the text starts out saying that he spoke through the angel. So somehow he's giving direct word through that angelic being. And the living one, and I was dead, and behold, I'm forevermore alive. I have the keys of death and Hades. Therefore write the things which you have seen. That clearly is chapter 1. That's what he's experienced at this point. And then he says, now the things which are now, which are present. And that's what's going to be talked about in 2 and 3 of chapter, of Revelation. And the things which shall take place after these things. But it doesn't say how long after these things. It just simply says after these things. Now, as we move through here, this to me, and this is not my chart, it's a friend of mine's, but it does say what I want to say, that I do believe in chapter 1 is the things that are, the things that you've seen, chapters 2 and 3 which are, chapter 4 to the end, they happen afterwards. And they still happen afterwards, they haven't happened yet. Because I wouldn't take what is called a preterist view that Revelation is dealing with before the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay? Now, let's move to the 7 churches then with all this information. We have 7 churches. Now, someone might argue, Well, yes, 7's a perfect number. And it is used that way sometimes, I grant. The number 7 sometimes, by the way, there's a great book on the usage of numbers, written by, trying to think of his name. It's been years since I've read it. But it deals with the fact of the biblical numerology. Very solid book by, I'm hoping it'll come to me before I finish, but it's been 30 years since I looked at the book. But people have dealt with this, and his conclusion in this, John Jefferson Davis, he was a professor, I think, at Grace Seminary in Winona Lake, Indiana. Davis argues that the only real number that probably has a clear usage as representative is probably the number 7. Some people try to make 12 or 10 or some other number, 3, 1, whatever. But you can decide that yourself. But some people say 7 here is not referring to 7 real churches, but the perfect group. There were 7 churches there. We know what they were and where they are. And we're going to look at them, actually. Were there other churches in Asia Minor? Yes. By that, were there other communities of Christians? Matter of fact, they're all over Asia Minor, outside this little area that we're talking about. All over Asia Minor, there were, in fact, communities of Christians. But these are the ones that were close to Ephesus and that are on a circuit, and I'll show that to you here. If you follow along with me, this is Ephesus right here. Everybody see that little pointer? This is Ephesus. Now watch where we're going. In the next line, the first church that is dealt with in this passage is Ephesus, the city of Ephesus. That's where John lived and where Mary lived with him. Now, Ephesus is here. Then the next church being talked about is Smyrna. The next church being talked about is Thyatira. The next one, Pergamum. The next one is Sardis. The next one's Philadelphia. And he skips Hieropolis and jumps down to Laodicea. Did I get Philadelphia? Yes. So there clearly are 7 churches that were actually existent at that point who received a letter that's called a circular letter. The book of Ephesians that Paul wrote is also called a circular letter, just like the book of Revelation. We oftentimes don't think about that because Ephesians is referring to Ephesus, which was the major church of the ancient world. It had the major audience of Christians at Ephesus. But there's a reason why. One is Paul founded the church and ministered there for a long time. Lots of people became Christians. Secondly, in Asia Minor, it was the predominant Roman center. It's the big church, like Houston versus Navasota. So it's not unusual to be predominant and dominant, if you will use the term. So that's the 7 churches, and that really makes a lot of sense historically to understand it that way. Now, we'll just look at a few things about the church. I'm not going to take the time to go into all this, but let me say, if you want, I'll run through these, and you can, if you want to watch these later, I'll give you a handout if you want. I've got a handout on this. I taught a bunch of Greek tour guides how to lead tours in Turkey, which was fun. I was asked to do that by a Turkey agency. They asked, would you be willing to lead a bunch of Greek tour guides so they can know how to do this when they come over? And I'm not a tour guide, but I just taught them how to teach as they go through it and sort of gave them a handout to work with. This is leading into Ephesus, and if you notice here, this road, which you only see a portion of it, goes right on down here, not very well kept. When you get right down to about here, moving down, the pavement is pretty steady, filled in, unlike the other, which is scattered. But it moves on down. Where's my little cursor? Come on here. It moves on down this way finally till it gets right down to this place here, which is the Library of Colossae. That was actually not at the time of Paul. It was built in the 2nd century, but AD, but very important historically. There was a major library at Alexandria, major library at Ephesus, one at Pergamum. That we have some major libraries in the ancient world. Leading on down the street, as we get closer to the library here, which is sort of a main street, what would you call that? Sort of like sort of the major center place of the city as you go through here. On the way, if you go back here, right about here where I'm pointing this, until you look to the left, you actually see this right here. This is, in fact, the library of Diocletian. And Diocletian was not a nice person. He was an emperor in the early 2nd century. But nonetheless, most of it has been destroyed in time. You notice that what happens in archaeology, a lot of things are broken and torn and sort of not there in the full extent. It takes a while to put things together again that have been broken down. But this right here to give the face up here that's not very visible is a god Tuke, mean luck. And if you look back here, you'll find another being. I don't know if you can see it, but another being back here is called Medusa. Anybody ever heard of Medusa? Really pretty lady with a lot of snakes, right? If you look at her, you are forever in her power because you are stone. And so anyway, that's Medusa back here in this particular temple to, I think, the god Hadrian there. I think that's who it was. Now, again, here's this person keeps following me along. She told me not to say that, but I think it's funny. Right there at, for so many years, I went by myself, and all of a sudden now I have this person with me all the time. She always wants to go. What do you think? So anyway, this right here is the Celsian Library. And here's that thing I promised you last week I didn't have. This is another game. Remember the other one was a little different from this. This is the other game. They didn't have some of the conveniences we have as games, but they figured out a way to play games. This is looking from the thing of Celsus. If you look over here, this high thing here, that stone structure, that is the library. That's the Library of Celsus. So if you go through this arch here, this leads you to the theater. This out here that you're looking at, that is the public Agora. Agora is a marketplace. That's where people have better success than I do here. I don't know why that thing keeps changing. But you have the marketplace out here, which is largely destroyed. The one at Corinth, remember, is much better preserved. But this one's not much to it now. A lot of rubble and so forth. But coming out here, you would actually go by and see some sites over to away from this area, and then you'd be going to the theater, the marketplace, and down this road right here, where you'll see in a few minutes, was on the way to the bay, to the place where you had the water and the ships and so forth. Remember I said what happened? The earthquake occurred, moved the water. Can you imagine that happening to a community? Wouldn't that destroy your economy a little bit? You got the water and all the commerce going on, and poof, earthquake occurs, and now you got 10 miles to go to get on your boat. It's a little change takes place. So what you have is this. So you have up to the theater over here, and then you have this down toward the bay. Now, I've got some pictures here, and I should point it out. I think I have. I don't know if I can move over there or not. I hope I brought them with me here. I want to point that out to you. Oh, by the way, if anybody wants to read some of these things I'm talking about, I created this for the Greek tour guides. If you want to make a copy of it here and give it to people that sort of develops stuff, I'll leave that here. A friend of mine owns a company called Bible Places. Anybody seen Bible Places? The person who does this is, in fact, a has done a lot of wonderful, high-quality photos of the ancient world. He has about 70,000 really high-quality photos in his grouping. And so I want to leave these here. I'll also leave them for the Schaefer Conference when they come. And he has been fully supportive of the House Visual Study Bible, and obviously I want to turn around and say, here's something that you might want to have some value from. If you have some interest in an area, I'm going to leave these here for you, and to also for the conferences coming up, and in case you have an interest in getting some of those. I also have an endorsement on that. Now, if you look at this, you'll notice this is not the way I would normally take a picture, because I haven't had, until recently, the access to actually be able to video things from the sky, right? I do have some pretty good pictures of Ephesus, by the way, from a mountain in the background, but these bird's eye pictures are really nice and better than I have in that respect. But if you'll notice, then this shows you that road here. Remember we were talking about entering into the city right here? See, you go off this way. You could also go to Kelsos Library, and this leads to the theater. Does that make sense? That's a picture from the sky. And then this is another picture. If you come, let's get our perspective now, is that you're coming from the library here, up here in this section right here where my pointer's going around, and you're walking this way toward the theater. See, that's a theater that held 20-something thousand people yelling and screaming, "Great is Diana." Actually, they didn't say Diana, that's Latin. They said Artemis. Greatest Artemis of the Ephesians. That's our hometown god. Leave her alone, And that's sort of where they're at. I mean, they're pushing their faith, as it were. And so you have all these people out there concerned about Christianity coming in. A few years later, they become Christians, so that's a little different. But right now, they didn't feel that way. This, again, goes down to the bay, historically, and other areas that you have structures here. And then from another angle, this angle here, by the way, is close to where I would be standing to take a picture. Remember that one I showed you last time, the oldest painting we have of the Apostle Paul and Thecla and Mary there? Remember that? Inside that cave that I was talking to you about. You can't get in there unless you get special permission. You have to have connections to get into the cave. But inside that, you have these frescoes, a bunch of them, that are really quite nice. And you come outside there, you stand on the mountain, and you would actually see you would see those things from the mountain there where we were. So that gives you perspective. Now this right here is a picture of the theater again that we see. And that particular one is looking out toward what the bay would have been. So what we have over here is the Kelsos Library, and the public area of the marketplace. You'd be walking those steps up to the beginning of the city up that way. So to give you perspective, we walked here, saw Diocletian's place, saw Hadrian's place, a little bit of Trajan, walked up here to the Kelsos Library, come up here, and now we're here at the theater. We could get on a ship if we got there early enough in history. And then this is in fact the great theater there. What is the difference between an amphitheater and a theater? An amphitheater is a coliseum, goes all the way around. A theater is only a portion, okay? The difference between a Greek and a Roman theater is that the Greeks always built their theaters into the actual landscape of the land, the mountain. You found a curved area, and that's where your theater went. Romans said, whatever, we'll put it where we want. And they built it upon columns underneath. So it's a different way of doing things. So you can tell real quick what it is, Roman or Greek. Now, moving on, I'll show you here what this is another picture of the theater. Isn't it a magnificent structure? And in here you had, again, all those people. And you can stand in here and stand on the stage, and you can talk, and you can sort of reverberate. There's a lot of the theaters of the ancient world, even the one that's found in Amman, Jordan. And also, you can do it also at not Miletus, but Jerish, up in Jordan. You can stand at a certain place in the theater, and you can just talk like this, and anybody up in the theater, in the seats up there, long ways from you. They can just hear you as plain as day. The sound just reverberates up. That's the same thing, by the way, that was used by Jesus when he got on a boat, moved outside from the land on the boat. It carried the sound across the waters up to the people to hear him. These people weren't dumb about how to communicate. And another thing that Jerish has is they have these little things that dug in about that thick into the stone, and they got these all the way around the inside of the theater. And you can get over here and have a person put their ear here. You can whisper here, and they can hear you as plain as day on the other side of the theater. It carries through the stone. It's amazing to find out some of this stuff. And it's fun to do it, by the way, to check it out. But it does work. I've done it many times. Anyway, this is a theater. And there's another look at it. But the next picture gives you some perspective. This is the way it sort of used to look. Now, they didn't have any pictures that they did this. This is a drawing based on what we know of Roman architecture, what we know of Greek architecture. It's based on certain things that we have knowledge of. It's likely that, as a matter of fact, this is pretty consistent in the ancient world. They didn't have we have places where we have just everything is different. They tended to follow the same patterns during time periods. And those time periods weren't like a year or two. They were decades and not centuries. They follow certain patterns. And you can see it again and again and again. And it's extremely unlikely they departed from the way in which they did it. That's why we know sort of remember the portico I mentioned last time about Solomon's portico, they call it? That's how Roman buildings looked. So here we are. You can see that here's the theater. If you were up here in the theater, you could look out and see the ships come in. Before the earthquake, that is. And you could go out of the theater, come in with the family for the evening, and then go get on your boat and head out. Right here at the bay, which is now 10 miles removed. But that's how it was at one point. All right, I've already showed you this one. That's that 2K up there. Smyrna. What about Smyrna? Smyrna is one of my favorite places. First of all, Izmir is a great place to live. We have some friends that live in Izmir. It's a gorgeous area. You like San Diego? A lot of people used to move to San Diego and one of the states to the left. Because it's beautiful and warm and just great. The ocean and all this stuff is really wonderful. And they don't have earthquakes. Okay? But Izmir is like that today, and it's just gorgeous. The blue water and the coolness of it all, and it's just a wonderful place. So that's ancient Smyrna, modern day Izmir. You'll notice the columns in the background. Those are called Corinthian columns, if you'll look here. So those are examples of some of the columns still standing. But the kind of top, there are three basic forms of columns in the ancient world. The first one was called Doric. Very simple, very simple. Just a little column, little bob at the top, and it looks like it has somebody's hair rolled up on both sides like this, and that's about it. Not very artistic. Then you had Ionic that came in, and it added a little fleur to it. But when Corinthian came in from Corinth, it became very ornate, like flowers and so forth. And this was adopted for, I don't know how many years, but for probably several hundred years. When they had columns, this is what you did. You had Corinthian columns like you have here, and they're very beautiful. And we maybe have some others I'm not sure I can show you. This is the underground system. Obviously, there was a little something on top there. They didn't walk around these things like this. These have been uncovered. And underneath there is part of the underground city, so to speak. And it's a place you can go in. Some places are not acceptable. I got to be a friend of the major archaeologist of Smyrna, and through another friend. And you spend a lot of time with him, and he would take me in those days. Did you ever meet Ersoy? Did you? The guy? Okay, you were there with him? I didn't know if he was there when we... But let us have access to some of the cool stuff on the wall that they had behind panes you couldn't get to. Lots and lots of graffiti and drawing and things in Greek, fascinating things. Even some Christian statements. But this is looking at it another way, just to look at an angle. This is underground. This is part of it. There's more to show you underground. But this right here, if you'll notice a little plastic they have here on the left, these hide so people can now, these were not even, this whole area was not available for a long time. But now it is available, but they've got everything very protected because they don't want people to get in there and trying to rub out some of the graffiti or something. You can't replace this stuff. And so all the way down the way, they have wonderful things written on the wall of both words, and they would sometimes use symbols. I'm in love with 3673. I don't know if that's one, but they would use actually numbers as symbols for people's names and things like this. And this is Smyrna. Pergamum. Now notice what Smyrna was, just to remember. The persecuted church. What was Ephesus? Forget. Nobody knows? The loveless church. Yeah, first love. Okay. So the loveless church in Ephesus, and then you have with Smyrna, the persecuted church. Pergamum is the compromising church, and we find some things there that are sort of interesting. Pergamum is a great site. It's high on a mountain, has a big theater, has a lot of fantastic and unique things, and below it, as you look up to the mountain and see all of this on top, which had, by the way, a temple to the god, he considered himself a god, the Emperor Trajan. On the ground is the official Asclepius, or Asclepian, after the god Asclepius. And they had an interesting way to do it. This is a place of healing. And you would come for healing. Lots of people came there for healing. So they would come up and they would have the priest, they would look you over, check you out, see if they thought you could be cured by their methods. If you weren't, they turned you away. If you were, they kept you. They always had 100% healing practice. Anybody they didn't think they could take care of pretty easy didn't get in. I won't get into the modern what's going on. So the fact is, Asclepius, it's fascinating that how they discriminated in order to maintain their status. But that's what they did. And they had pools you could get in, and of hot water and various kinds of things. It was quite a place. But Pergamum was called in the book of Revelation. Notice in verse 13, this is where Satan dwells. What would he be talking about? It very well may be this. This is one of the centers of worship of the god Zeus. Jupiter in Latin, Zeus in Greek. Remember that you had the pantheon of deities, and theoretically Mount Olympus historically, right? But the various cities began to pick their gods, that they would give special honor to and ask protection from. Even some cities like Athens, they had a lot of gods they gave favor to. Athens was a big city, so they had maybe more than one god they could favor, take care of. But they also had an altar to an unknown god just in case they missed somebody. They did not want to be offensive to any god. So in case we missed you, we talked about you, see. So Zeus, though, is at Pergamum. And what's significant is this, and this is not evident when you go to, this is way below. You have the hill where you have the temple to the Roman god. Remember, all the emperors became gods eventually too, remember? Up there, and then you had the theater that goes down. You have other little temples around. But below, there is a mound that has been overgrown today. Right here, you see the trees on it. Historically, it didn't have trees. See the steps? This mound actually hosted a temple to the god Zeus. And John calls this the place where Satan has his headquarters. This is the place that Satan has his importance. But there's no temple there. What happened in about the 19th century, I'm not sure on this, don't hold me to it, but sometime in the modern era, I think it was the 19th century, a very wealthy person came in and had a friendship with one of the chief Muslim leaders, the Caliph. And he helped out on some things. He was, I think, from Germany. And he asked permission, could I take back a few little artifacts back to Berlin? And sure, no problem, take some archaeology. We don't really care much about it anyway. So he did. He dismantled the entire Temple of Zeus and took it back to Berlin. And I've been to this place in Berlin. They have three major museums there. One is called the Noahs actually. The Noahs, the Altus, and then the Pergamon Museum. Guess what's in the Pergamon Museum? The Noahs and Altus Museum deal with a lot of Egyptian and ancient Greece and Roman, all sorts of things. The Pergamon Museum deals with some things from the walls of Babylon and has a statue, has a temple that they reconstructed after they took it apart. Now, I have seen many pictures of this historically, and all of them have very poor pictures, and they're from different angles and take just little bitty pieces of it. And I thought, none of these are satisfying to me. And the problem is that the depth between the wall here, this is wide, and this is a depth. The difference between the wall here and the wall there where the temple was, the temple took up most of the room here, has a little space and has a wall. You don't have enough room to get a picture. A lot of room this way. So I bought me a lens that would do it. I didn't like paying for it, but I got it, and I've used it for other things. But I stood there. I had a moment there where I stood and thought, I see it all. Click. And I got it looking straight into it. That's what you're looking at. This was a temple of Zeus, talked about the seat of Satan. Pergamum has some other things in it. These are on top of the mountain. You can see various temples to various emperors and other people. But this is the theater going down. I've always wondered about these people climbing up and down these theaters. I do not know if they had insurance. But these are terrible. I've had to climb up and down some of these things. And I'm thinking, if you fall, this is really hard stone. So I don't know what they did when they had riots. But anyway, these go up and down the mountain. Over there is another temple over there on the side. If you look here, you'll see this is at the Asclepion down below, looking up at the mountain, and you can see up there the theater that comes down the mountain. It's really quite a place. Then you have the Church of Thyatira. Won't take but 30 seconds on this one. I used to not take people to Thyatira and Philadelphia, and for a reason, and that is because there's not much to see. But I had people start saying, I'd like to be able to say at least I was at each of the 7 church areas, so I changed my mind. But it's a corrupt church, but not much to it. That's it. Now, there's just nothing to look at. Just a bunch of stones. Nobody's done any work there. That's about it. There's a dead church of Sardis, which actually has some pretty cool stuff. That is actually on the side of a Jewish synagogue, but this is the market area. You even have people's names found here. They found people's information on who they were and what it was and so forth. On the outside, you walk down the street, and then these are little places that they have their shops. This is inside the synagogue. This isn't first century. This is I think 3 centuries later. But it's really beautiful what they've done here. But what you find, you're looking, that's in the front where they kept the Torah. This is looking toward the back, and it looks like it was used by a Byzantine church later because of the structure of the semicircular way in which they probably all the Byzantine church had that basic structure. So I think somebody built that into it. But look at notice the little animals on the side. That is not allowed in a Jewish synagogue. You don't put animals in. So that's later on the same structure. But it was, in fact, a synagogue for some time. You can climb over that. It's a lot easier to do it this way. You climb over the ladder and you move into the Roman bath area. And there's Roman baths were very important. This, again, is at Sardis. This dates back probably into the early periods. And you have, there's the bath. So like the Pool of Siloam kind of idea. Step in there and the water would be warm. This is a temple to Artemis, I believe. But this is in part of Pergamum, quite a ways from the actual, not Pergamum, I mean Sardis. Quite a ways from this. It's amazing. It must have been a pretty good area because you have to drive to the other place. By the way, I was standing up here one day and I was just talking to another guy. I didn't realize it, and you could hear all the way. I was breaking into the tour guide. People couldn't hear him, and I didn't realize it. My first trip there. Carries sound very great. Philadelphia, faithful church. But unfortunately, we don't have a lot left there to look at. This is a tour group inside. These were the structures above. This was some kind of later structure. It's not. There really is nothing there from the first century to look at. The last church here is Laodicean Church. When I first went there, I said, where is Laodicea? They said, it's out there somewhere. This is back about 2000. Matter of fact, it was maybe before that. But this has been uncovered. When I was there was nothing visible but grass. And they started doing some work here, and notice they started uncovering it. And gradually, a little more, they began to form it. We're going to look at that little white place in a moment. But that's looking across the Lycus Valley from Laodicea, and another place is called Hieropolis, the holy city. These are the streets of Laodicea. Again, when I first went there, nothing was there. This has all been reconstructed from what they found underneath. And so up and down there you can go. There you have another temple behind you. But what's fascinating here, besides the temple structures here, is this. I saw this when I went there. I guess it wasn't the first time. It was a few years after my first time. But I saw this and I thought, what is that doing here? Now, you may not know what it is, but it's a Jerusalem church menorah, where you have essentially a structure of the cross and the menorah, and usually you have something about a fish connected to all of it as a symbol. And even if you don't have all of it there clearly indicates a Jewish Christian community at this point. The city of Laodicea had a lot of deposits of salt. And so it's a real question on what's going on here. But Hieropolis that we're going to see had hot water that came into this area. And that would have probably rusted out some of this. But it says, would you be either hot or cold? And some people say hot for the Lord or cold for the Lord. It's not talking about that. Because being hot and cold were both good. Hieropolis, the hot, was warm springs that thousands came to every year and got in the warm jacuzzis there. And in Colossae, there's wonderful cold water. I've been there and put it in my mouth and it's got cold water just flowing on the ground and in the areas. So looking across, you can see all that white. We're going to go over there. This actually are the mountains of the warm springs at Hieropolis. And I've climbed all over that. It's really quite an interesting area. Hieropolis means holy city, but they have the largest cemetery, I guess, there in the ancient world. People went there by the thousands to enjoy all this and stay there until they died. Lots and lots and lots of graves go on for acres and acres. There we are again. And so you have, here's the springs that come out of Colossae. See the water just flowing on the ground? That's how it is all over the place there. Yes?
Salt, not snow. Did you mention
Oh, no, that's not snow. Those are salt deposits. Warm, that come out of the ground, warm springs and salt. Very healing for you. And that stopped. So you got an exposure to some of these things. I try to teach you some understanding of aspects you need to know in archaeology, and the same gave you a little tour. Any questions? You ready to go? Okay. I said an hour 30 minutes, and I'm 10 minutes fast. Okay. Well, let me go ahead and end in prayer, and we can talk afterwards if you want. Lord, we thank you for all your goodness to us, and thank you for giving us understanding that helps us to understand the Bible better and our world. And Lord, we just pray that you would do a special work in our hearts and our minds too, that we might be students of you and your nature and your work in our world. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.